Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the next instalment of our Postgraduate Research Festival, which is PGR Talks. I'm Holly Prescott. I am the Careers Advisor for Postgraduate Researchers here at the University of Birmingham, and I'm very pleased to have been invited to introduce this session today. Of course, PGR Talks is part of our Research Festival, which is part of UOB Extra, a real celebration of all things University of Birmingham. And in the session today, we are going to be hearing from three of our current postgraduate researchers working across a diverse range of areas and research themes. And the themes that they span are fairer world, life-changing technologies, and thriving planet. We'll be meeting our speakers in just a few minutes, but before we do, I just wanted to pause a little bit and talk about the research themes that we're going to be hearing about this afternoon. Now, these research themes are by no means arbitrary, and they already show what a crucial impact our PGRs are having and will go on to have in our contemporary world. So I just wanted to start off by giving a little bit of context. So I don't want to start off on a super negative note, but statistics show that over the past year, we've seen around a 22.5% contraction of the UK job market. And I can see some people in the audience being like, seriously? Yeah, come on. However, when it comes to green jobs, so what we mean by this is roles that contribute to preserving or restoring that thriving planet that we talked about, these jobs are up by nearly half since 2023. So for those PGRs who are contributing to preserving or restoring our environment and planet, there are real opportunities here. When we move on to technology, now, I don't know how smart it is to go plucking random statistics off the internet, but I read the other day that apparently 90% of the data that we have today has been produced over the past 2 years. Which begs the question, what do we do with that? How do we harness that? How do we use it for good and make sense of it? And I think that's one of the reasons why we have seen an explosion in roles requiring higher degrees focused on big data and helping us make sense of all this information that's coming at us all the time. And then when we move to the fairer world theme, now as well as job roles that involve the environment, social and governance issues being projected to rise significantly, we're also seeing amongst younger job seekers now a real focus on wanting to work for employers that they feel match their values. Now, I think linked to that as well, I think we can all say that we've never needed people who can talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a compelling and well-evidenced way as we need them today. And our PGRs who are working towards this theme have a key role to play in making sure that work, whatever that means or whatever that will look like for us in the future, is accessible, equitable, and fair for all of us. So, some of the problems that are linked to these key research themes we're talking about today, the growth of AI, climate change, global uncertainty, global inequalities, these are complex, interdisciplinary problems. And the good news is that PGRs are well placed to break down and help solve complex, interdisciplinary problems. So much so that in a study of 96 employers of doctoral graduates, 3/4 of those employers said that if they lost their workforce who were qualified at doctoral level, that would have either a business critical or a significant impact on their operations. So the more these kinds of complex problems will come to shape and define the work that we will do in the near future, then I'm sure that statistic is projected to rise in that key role that our PGRs will play across lots of different sectors. So because of that, if I had any advice for PGRs for the future, it would be that these problems we've talked about are not mutually exclusive. Climate, justice, technology overlap. So my advice to PGRs would be prepared to work together to make an impact. Show that they can work with a range of people, demonstrate an awareness of how their skills and their expertise and their interests connect with others and can be harnessed to work together towards shared goals. So, with that, I'll move on and introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Christelle Bay Chongwain, who is a doctoral researcher here at University of Birmingham, who's going to be talking to us about her research on diversifying dementia care, looking at how the voluntary sector organisations support people from Black and ethnic minority communities in Birmingham who are living with dementia.
Thank you very much, Holly. Thank you, everyone. I'll be presenting under the theme Fairer World. Permit me share the story of my friend Fatima, who doesn't exist. Fatima is 72 years old. She moved into Birmingham 40 years ago from Pakistan. She's been living with her family in a Handsworth in Birmingham. Of recent, Fatima has been showing symptoms of memory loss. She's been forgetting her favorite spices. She's been forgetting her prayer times. She's been forgetting her children's names. But her daughter dismisses this and thinks that this is a normal part of aging. But this continues to intensify. And with the advice from a family friend, they decide to seek support from the health services. When they get to the health services, they face language barriers. They're unable to communicate with whoever they meet at the services. They face a long wait list, and there's a cultural mismatch with Fatima referred to a day center where she can't understand the language and the food. The first meaningful support that Fatima eventually gets after she's given up is from a faith-based memory cafe in their community that presents those services in their local language, Urdu. That is when Fatima gets to hear the word dementia for the first time in their local language. And in their culture, dementia is something that comes with shame. It is hidden in misunderstanding and silence. They don't get to talk a lot about it. Fatima's story is not unusual. It's actually that clear reflection of how, even though health services can be universal, they may still be unequal in their effects. The question is, what does dementia care and support means to people? And how does that support looks like when it's meant to be for everyone, but it is not reaching everyone? And how can we do better? My study is based on social constructionism. First, before the 20th century, memory loss, symptoms of memory loss were seen as a normal part of aging. Alzheimer's emerged in the 1900s as a diagnostic category, and that shifted that focus on dementia as a normal part of aging into a medical category, with people with dementia seen as requiring more of medical intervention than people who have a culture, who have a dignity, or who have other things beyond that medical aspect to focus on. So this biomedical focus on dementia often overlooked those social or cultural or environmental factors that surround the people living with dementia. And that is where dementia care and support misses the mark, where cultural beliefs clash with the biomedical model of dementia, and when language and literacy become barriers for people to access dementia care and support, or when people are diagnosed late, not diagnosed at all, or referred to the wrong services. And so far, voluntary sector organizations, though small, rooted in different communities, are providing support to meet those cultural needs of people with dementia, despite barriers they face as limited funding and lack of long-term impact. These are organizations that are trusted by families, embedded in communities, provide services in the local languages of people, and meet people where they are. If we have to move towards a fairer world in dementia care and support, it means providing dementia care and support that responds to those cultural needs of people. My project focuses on Birmingham, one of the most ethnically diverse cities in the UK, and it aims first to map out those voluntary sector organizations that provide culturally appropriate support to people from Black and ethnic minority communities, but also to explore the lived experiences of people with dementia. What does dementia care and support mean to someone, and how does it mean to access, what prevents them to access those services, or what strategies do these voluntary sector organizations use to engage people from Black and ethnic minority communities? My research is grounded on social constructionism, as I mentioned before, and this simply means that I'm viewing dementia from the point of my research as socially constructed, and it is shaped by culture and social context, but also paying attention to the personhood of the person living with dementia, their lived experiences, their background, their culture, their identity, their autonomy as a person, and most especially, assessing how these services meet the cultural needs of these people. So far, the way dementia is socially constructed influences how policy is created around dementia, influences access to treatment, or influences policy and people's lived experiences of dementia. The literature so far shows that in most ethnic minority communities, dementia is always viewed not from a biomedical lens, but from a cultural lens. And this actually influences how people engage in services. My methodology is rooted in a community approach and participatory. First, getting interviews with the voluntary sector organization staff to assess the cultural appropriateness of their services, but also exploring the lived experiences of people with dementia using photography, a participant-led approach to promote their autonomy in the whole process. So if we have to move towards a fairer world in dementia care and support, there's that need for cultural change, of structural change, especially around funding these small organizations that meet these people where they are, and recognizing the role that culture plays in dementia care and support, and how dementia care and support can be more inclusive and person-centered through re-establishing social structures that can help through that. So in reimagining dementia care and support, a fairer world means dementia care and support that speaks the people's language, that understands their culture and meets people where they are. And seeing those people living with dementia, not just as patients ready to receive medical treatments, but also as people with a dignity, a culture, and a background that must be respected if they have to receive care and support, but also co-creating services with these people. This tells us that Fatima's story is actually reminding us of how fairness in dementia care is urgent and important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christelle. Right, so without further ado, we'll hand on to our next speaker. Before we do, just to remind you that after we've heard from all three of the speakers today, you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions in a brief Q&A. But we are now ready for our second speaker, Katie Potts. And Katie's going to be talking to us about her work on the emulation of sensory rooms in virtual reality and the impacts of that emulation on anxiety in autistic adults. Here you go, Katie.
Hi, thanks for the introduction. As mentioned, I'm Katie, and I'm going to be discussing with you what's just been said. To start with, I'll start with an explanation of sensory rooms because they're not the most common topic outside of autistic spaces. These are rooms where the equipment and the tools are chosen and placed to achieve two goals. The first goal is casual leisure. This is the idea that the concept of relaxation, where any sort of external goal, so you're not trying to build something, not trying to make something, you are just trying to relax and enjoy the space. And the second and a bit more complicated one is the idea of trying to meet sensory thresholds. So everyone has a sensory threshold for each of the there's 7 senses, but that's not important right now, which is just the amount of sensory input that someone can take in without feeling overwhelmed, otherwise known as overstimulated, and the amount that they need to feel comfortable in their environment. You probably experienced it before, that you felt that somewhere is too loud, too bright, too dim, too quiet. The idea is that sensory rooms are designed to enable people to spend time in a space where they have more control over the sensory input that they get, and so they get the correct amount of sensory input for their threshold. This is particularly important for autistic people because it is a common symptom of autism that their threshold tends to be a lot higher or lower than standard. So generally speaking, right now, sensory rooms are more commonly used in spaces for people who have high level of support needs, such as specialist schools or specialist residential facilities. This is due to 2 of the main flaws in sensory rooms. These 2 main flaws are currently the amount of space that they need and the cost of them. Sensory rooms are expensive. They can cost up to over £1,000 for a single piece of equipment, and they require an entire room to be able to exist. Obviously, that is not sustainable for a lot of people. In particular, it's not sustainable for people who either currently do not have a diagnosis due to the current issues in the NHS based around the fact that it can take over 2 years to get an autism diagnosis in the UK. And even when they do get that diagnosis, a study has proven that 78% of people, I think that's a number I cannot remember off the top of my head, but over 70% of people, after they get a diagnosis, do not get any support for the anxiety that they face or any of the symptoms of their autism due to the lack of services in the UK. And so so this is a life-changing technology in that it allows for wider access to this kind of therapy that currently people aren't getting. So, to discuss the more logistic aspects of it, I'm now going to talk to you about some of the aspects I needed to consider when I was developing this technology. One of the interesting things about developing a sensory room in virtual reality is that you do have to consider aspects that you don't generally have to consider when building a more mundane in real world sensory room, because when you are in virtual reality, how you move and how you pick things up is a deliberate choice by the developer. So I had to consider multiple methods, such as teleportation or using physical controls, and from that I just basically determined it and programmed it myself. I then had to do a deep dive analysis into all of the sensory room equipment that was available, and I found that there are just some things that can't be developed in virtual reality yet. There is not the commercially available tactile technology for a lot of the tactile things that you'll find in sensory rooms. Instead, you have to more focus on things that will engage the vision, people's hearing, that can engage them in ways that let them reach out and touch things. So from that, I built 5 prototypes because I drew them and then I decided I want to see how this works in the virtual space, so I built them all. And from that, I built that, what you can see pictures of up there. And I managed to, and I picked a prototype that I would use for my later testing. So, the actual test. I had 29 participants because they would told me that 28 participants was the best number to prove statistical significance, but then a couple of them went a bit wrong, so I got another participant. And I got them to fill in the State Trait Anxiety Index, which is basically the questionnaire for figuring out change in anxiety. I only used the state part mostly because the trait part examines anxiety as just an inherent trait of who you are, and I was more interested in the temporary emotion of anxiety, so I just used the part that was useful to me. And so I did a pre-post testing exercise, which meant I just got them to fill it in before and after, and from that, I got an 8.15% reduction in anxiety, which was proven to be statistically significant in it being an effective tool to reduce the anxiety of autistic people, who are a group of people who are known to have anxiety as a comorbidity as part of their condition. I also got heart rate results, and that's the rolling means, which basically means I took everyone's heart rate, I averaged it out, and I put it on a graph. As you can see, the rise there is when I deliberately got them to do a thing to raise their anxiety, because that's generally just done in these sorts of experiments to prove that it goes down, because otherwise you might just have a not anxious person, which means that it's not very helpful. That dip is when they started using the program. And as you can see, it stays down even after they stop using the program. Even though there is a rise, it does not return to the heightened level. And also part of that is a glitch because I forgot to stop the program before they took the heart rate monitor off, which is my bad. So, why does this work? So there's two actual computer science terms that are important to understand why this thing works. The first one is telepresence. This is the ability of a program to make you believe you're in a different space. And this links back to the thing I discussed earlier, casual leisure. If you believe you're in a space where there's no responsibilities, you can more focus on just doing the things that are nice and relaxing because you're in a space where there's no responsibility here, which is really great for reducing anxiety. And then secondly, there's the concept of immersion. This is the fact that when you have a virtual reality headset, you are in control of the sensory input of the user, which is really great when one of the symptoms of autism is that they struggle with sensory input, so you can make it so that you have the perfect sensory environment for the user. Which basically means an ideal sensory room where they have exactly the senses that they want. Both of these are important to making it so that this virtual tool can be used as an effective tool for anxiety reduction. So yeah, sensory rooms are a tool used in anxiety reduction. Emulating them has several challenges, but it's possible, and I know it because I've done it. The emulation has a statistically significant effect on reducing anxiety in autistic adults. And to get back to the point of life-changing technologies, this means that we now have a foundational work from which we can do more research into the concept of how to build VR tools that are even more effective at reducing anxiety for autistic adults by making it so that we can now move on from the physical space and go on to having a tool that is built for them that is easy to access even without a diagnosis, which is hard to get. Even if you can't access tools that cost over £1,000 each, you can still access virtual reality, which is still a few £100s, but that's less than thousands, and that means that we can use technology to make therapy easier to access for everyone. Thank you for listening.
Well done. Thank you so much, Katie. Right, so last but not least, we're on to Thriving Planet, and we're going to hear from our third speaker, David Dowson. So David's a part-time second-year PhD in the business school, and he's going to be talking to us about his research on the practice and theory governing the classification of pollution incidents by organisations.
Right, good afternoon, everyone. It's important I give you a bit of context. So I'm a part-time researcher, but I'm a full-time environmental consultant. I'm one part of that green economy you've read about just on those slides a second ago. And part of what we do is potentially, I lead a team of environmental consultants as well, is we may potentially sometimes be called up to deal with pollution incidents. Now, these are localized releases of harmful materials into sensitive habitats. And here you can see one that I cleaned up. Behind me is a very large construction site. And what you're seeing is about 15 tons of concrete dust mixed in with water, released into a riverbed. Now, that would undoubtedly have an impact on that marine environment, and so would this. This is a fluid, you can't see it, but it's a sort of white substance called a CAS 8049987. If that's released into a water column, just like that, what would happen is a chain of events would occur which would cause complete removal of the oxygen from that watercourse, and you would have what we call fish kill, which is quite self-explanatory, really. Now, would it surprise you to know that in the UK today, if I was to take 100 cubic meters of that pollutant, put it into a river system somewhere in the world, or somewhere in the UK at least, there's probably half a chance you would have no idea I did it, and I wouldn't have to tell you that I did it in the first place. That's the reality of what we're living with. And this is a pie chart from a survey that I completed as part of my PhD, the point of which I will get to in a second. But basically what you're looking at is the big pink slice that you can see is showing that around half of people in my field think that only 10% of their incidents that their employer caused are actually reported externally. 10%. Now, my own personal experience backs this up as well. I went through 6 incidents that I've seen, I've cleaned up, I've witnessed over the last 10, 15 years of my career, and I found there were, of potentially 30 records, 2 potential actual records. And even then, they were only passing. They were, following an incident, we installed this bit of equipment or something like that. They were very, very vague. So for all intents and purposes, these incidents are taking place and they're invisible. And bear in mind, I've gone and done freedom of information requests from all 4 of the main UK regulators. I have their entire database going back over 15 years. From 2010 to 2020, there were 242,000 incidents reported. Now, if you think that that's only 10%, that's potentially 2.4 million. And that's 2 every minute when you do the maths on it. So this is a major problem. Even in industries which are heavily regulated and are required by law to release their pollution incidents, you find inaccurate data, dodgy, if I could call it that, goings on in terms of the practices that are involved. And the one that really, really surprises me and surprises people is if you go and look at someone's annual reports in the water companies from 2015, let's say, they may say, we caused 100 incidents. You then go and look at the 2016 report and it says, last year in 2015, we caused 50. And when you start to investigate what's going on there, you find a few references to, following last year, we met with the Environment Agency and we decided we were only responsible for 50 of them, so we've retrospectively changed the number. So what this means is, you, as someone looking at these annual reports, can look at 1 year and you will not get an accurate picture of what the actual number of incidents caused is. Now, I think that's wrong. I think that's really wrong. I think everyone in this room, investors, people who work with these organizations, should know the full impact that a business is having upon the environment, and it should be mandatory to do so. So why is this happening? My research, my personal experience in the field tells me there are 4 things that are going on. The first is that there is no universal system of pollution classification. There are thousands of different ways of classifying pollution. I have a whole slide that shows all the different ways that I've found, but there are thousands. Secondly, because of that, you cannot have any meaningful comparisons. You cannot say, well, this organization has had 10, this one has had 20, and know that you are looking at the same classification, the same definition. They're all different. Thirdly, there is a delayed or unseen impact. Now, what that means is when you have, let's say, a health and safety incident, you have an injured party, you know exactly what's happened, you know what the treatment is, you can deal with it. With an environmental incident, I've had one which has been released underground and has ended up in a famous pop star's garden a couple of days later. It's completely variable when you may see the full impact, and that means it's difficult to classify. And thirdly, there is, as far as I can tell, almost no regulation, no laws, no frameworks anywhere in the world that requires organizations to disclose their pollution incidents, except a few in occasions like the UK water companies. Now, I can't deal with a lot of those problems. I can't deal with the lack of regulation, but what I can do is try and deal with the issue of classification, is trying to create a universal system wherever possible. And that leads me to my first 2 research questions. First of all, what are the current systems in place? What do people like about them? What's good about them? What's bad about them? How do they think they could be better? And secondly, what would an ideal system look like? What structure would it have? What would the governance be? And then obviously we can produce some samples from that. My plan is basically to take what I've done on the survey, create some of these, and then test them in semi-structured interviews over the next 2 years or so to test these. One thing that has come out of this survey that was quite interesting, and I'll just mention for you now, is the UK government uses a classification system numerically based. So they will look at categories 1 to 4, and there are different criteria for each of those. What we found through our survey was actually a lot of people prefer sort of emotive, visual language, so red, amber, green, severe, moderate, low, that kind of thing, rather than numerical, which obviously feeds into what I'm going to do with the eventual system. And let me just finish off by showing you a potential future. So some of you might be familiar with the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting Framework. Imagine if you have something similar. This is a table that shows your carbon emissions over a year. Imagine if you have something similar for pollution, where we've classified them by colour. And we've said this is the number that occurred last year, this is the number that occurred this year, this is the percentage change, but also an intensity ratio, which allows you to have this comparison over years. You can see we have this at the bottom, the incidence per £1 million of revenue. That means you can compare across the years, that meaningful comparisons. And this is what I'm working on right now. So thanks very much for that. And just to reiterate, CAS 8049987 is milk. So just goes to show you that anything can be a highly polluting substance when it's released into the wrong environment. Thank you. On that note,
Thank you so much, David. All that's on my mind now is which pop star's garden was it? Speaking of which, we now have the opportunity for you in the audience to ask our speakers burning questions that their presentations have brought up. So if you follow the QR code on the screen, this takes you through to our Q&A, and it's in a platform called Vevox. And you should look to the top right-hand side. On the top right-hand side, there's a comment box where you can submit questions to one or all of our speakers. So that's Vevox, and that's the top right-hand side comment box where you can submit questions. Now, I've been told we've got secret fingers behind the scenes who are moderating the questions. Secret fingers, everyone, who are moderating the questions, and they'll be displayed over here so that I can see them and we can field them to our speakers. So, shall we come over here and... Okay, so we'll give you a few minutes to post your questions. Whilst we're waiting for people's questions, whilst we're waiting for people's questions to come in, I was about to kick things off, but I had a generic question for all the speakers, but I'm going to go with what's been submitted so far. So I'm going to go with the middle question. What's the best thing about being a PGR at Birmingham? David, can we start with you?
Probably not the best person to ask because I'm part-time and I remote quite a lot of the time. You know, I don't come to uni all the time, but at the moment, I can definitely tell you the support, the facilities are great when I am here. The supervision is fantastic. The systems are great. Just generally speaking, it's a good experience overall. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Personally, I'd say for me, it's that being a PDR has really given me the opportunity to do research that honestly would otherwise be impossible. Like as a 26-year-old, getting to do your own personal study in a new technology that might not be economically viable doesn't happen in industry. You get put on other people's projects. So having the chance to really explore this thing that I feel so passionate about has been really amazing, and I can't regret any of it.
A couple of weeks ago, a young girl I was mentoring, I asked her what university she would prefer to go to. She mentioned a couple of universities, and I asked her, how about the University of Birmingham? She said, oh no, that's a big university, I won't even be admitted. So people know that it has a very high reputation, you know, really recognized. But also I have the support I need, especially from my supervisors. I'm able to be myself in my research and to excel at my best, you know, the facilities and everything, and also my peers. So it's just that kind of an environment I want to excel in as a PGR.
Perfect. And Christelle, can we stick with you, because someone's asked a question specifically about your research. So next question is based on your research. What policy level changes do you believe would be most effective to support culturally appropriate dementia care in urban areas like Birmingham?
Thank you for that question. So from the research so far, these voluntary sector organizations provide very vital services to the communities, but they have barriers around funding, accessing funding. So if policy can pay attention to institutionalizing long-term funding for these organizations, they can be able to provide services that are tailored to the needs of these communities, but also sustainability for these organizations and enable them that space to innovate, to create more innovative services that meet the needs of those people. And another could be policy around competence training for across health and social care, in a way that it is not a one-off training, but it's a required professional training where everyone understands the role that culture plays in memory, in dementia, in family dynamics. And that can also mean training those people to meet those needs of communities as a policy requirement. And finally, I'm looking at working with the community leaders in Birmingham, for example, when co-creating services to meet the needs of these people. This is not about just consulting them, but they are on the table. Faith leaders, leaders of community organizations, they are on that table where services are co-created when it comes to issues around care pathways.
Thank you. I think your research, Krista, I think really pulls out what I found looking at a lot of the posters today as well, which is the issues, the problems that so many of our PGRs are working on, are looking maybe at an issue that's specifically or historically been seen as the responsibility of, say, one government department or one area, like, oh, that's a health issue, when it's actually a lot more complex than that, and it requires this whole ecosystem of departments and support coming together.
Yeah,
and
it requires public health. It requires social care coming together. It requires the third sector, voluntary sector organizations. So it's that kind of joint working with these people and the people from minority ethnic communities if we really want to make the services inclusive and not only culturally sensitive, but culturally appropriate.
Absolutely. Right. So I'll go on with another question for another one of our speakers. So, Katie, a question for you. And someone's asked, can developing one of these sensory rooms be risky for the person testing it? So, for example, if the sound was too high or one of the sensory stimuli was, say, too high, is there a risk attached to that?
Yes, when I was developing my experiment plan, I did heavily consider the risk of overstimulation. Initially, I was considering only having people who already had an above average threshold for the purposes of ensuring the safety. However, in the end, I did decide to back away from that, which was valuable because I found that it did benefit even those who have a lower threshold. But one of the main things is to make it very clear to the participants that there is no expectation for them to stay using the program if it is overstimulating, and also for there to be that communication with the participant when they are first starting to use the program, and ensure that they are safe, happy and comfortable before letting them stepping away and letting them use the program. And I think continuing on from this, I think one of the main things to make sure that these are safe programs is to allow for a high level of customization in these programs, so that they can start with it being silent if they want it to be, or start with it being quiet and let them turn up the sound of it, and like make it a choice to engage with things that will make it brighter, will make it louder, but enable them to choose that rather than having the default environment be already bright or already loud, which I think that VR can enable, just because there is that, because it's not a real space, you have the concept of immersion means that you do have that much more control than you might in a traditional sensory space.
No, thank you, Katie. When I was listening to you talk about your work, I was thinking, like, the technology you've developed is like you being able to give people accessible access to their happy place.
Yeah.
Right. Right, so we got time for one more question for David, because we haven't done one for you yet. So, David, quite a lot of people have upvoted this question as well. And someone's asked, what will having a doctorate add to your current work as an environmental activist and consultant?
Absolutely nothing. No, so I've never been called an activist before, I have to say. I don't think of myself like that. But anyway, when you work in any kind of business, what usually grabs people's attention in terms of either trying to get more work or even getting a new job in a different employer is, what have you actually done? Don't tell me what qualifications you have, tell me what you've done with it. But a PhD is one of those exceptions, because it's like, if you want to be a real expert in something, do a PhD, because then you have spent years of your life dedicated to studying not just one topic, one subtopic of a subtopic of a subtopic, basically, over and over again. The knowledge that you bring with you and the skills you have to develop in order to get that qualification are just above anything else, basically. So if you want to be a real expert in a field, it's just the way to do it, definitely. And that's what I'd say to that one.
Thank you, David. I think you summed up there the best pitch for a PhD that we heard in this session, which came from you, Katie, which was, I know it because I've done it. Shall we end there, or do we have time for another question, or shall we leave it with, I know it because I've done it? Yeah. We'll leave it there. Okay, lovely.